In the 1880s, American workers joined the Knights of Labor, a labor union first organized in 1869 by a group of Philadelphia tailors. The Knights of Labor took off after the election of Terence Powderly as Grand Master Workman in 1879.
They wanted workers to be better paid. They wanted workers to work shorter hours in better working conditions. But they were also concerned about a larger issue about what's happening to this republic. What's happening to this republic in the face of the coming of large-scale corporations. And they upheld a vision. They called it the cooperative commonwealth. They were looking forward to an age, a new age, when Americans, if they couldn't have small-scale businesses of their own, maybe workers together would join together to form cooperative businesses and manage them themselves in a cooperative way, rather than having these large-scale, bureaucratically managed corporations.
The Knights of Labor called for new laws to restrict child and women's labor, to inspect the nation's workplaces, and to recognize women's suffrage.
About 10 to 15% of the membership by the middle of the 1880s consisted of women, and an equal percentage, 10 to 15%, most people think, included blacks. So it was the most democratic movement to its time.
In the early 1880s, the Knights won a series of strikes. Its members engaged in a wave of boycotts, refusing to buy anything made by a company that would not negotiate with the union. Attracting new members by its successes, the Knights of Labor became the largest union in United States history. Boasting 700,000 workers in 1,500 locales, the Knights prepared a great national campaign to win workers an 8-hour workday.
The year 1886 will be known as the year of the great uprising of labor. The skilled, unskilled, the high-paid, and the low-paid all joined hands. George McNeil, Massachusetts Knight.
In the spring of 1886, close to 340,000 American workers went out on strike, demanding an 8-hour day. By the end of the year, more than 1,500 strikes and boycotts had paralyzed the nation. Their employers struck back.
There were private guards who were hired by these businessmen to see that the plants did not have union sympathizers in it, to see that during strikes the pickets were kind of beaten back from the walls of the factories so that the factories could operate with non-union, so-called scab labor. And they also used their political power. They would go to local either mayors, or they would go to local governors, and sometimes to the President of the United States, and ask them to call out the militia or the U.S. Army to quell disorders and get those workers back to work.
In May of 1886, the war between capital and labor again exploded in flames in Chicago, the industrial colossus of the Midwest, where 40,000 workers struck for the 8-hour day. When pickets and strikebreakers clashed outside the great McCormick Reaper Works, the nation's largest manufacturer of farm machinery, police attacked the strikers, killing 2 unarmed men. The next day, a crowd of 2,000 working men gathered at Haymarket to hear speeches denouncing the police brutality at a rally organized by German-speaking anarchists, people who opposed any kind of government.
The rally seemed to be diminishing at the time, but someone threw a bomb into the ranks of the policemen, and at that point in time, several, I believe 7 or 8 policemen were killed by the bomb itself.
The police arrested 8 anarchists who were quickly convicted of the crime, despite the fact that no evidence was ever found to tie them to the bomb thrower. But few Chicagoans complained. The Haymarket bombing whipped the city and the nation into an anti-labor, anti-immigrant frenzy. Growing numbers of Americans blamed foreign agitators for the United States labor crisis. A single bomb, wrote labor organizer Samuel Gompers, had demolished the 8-hour movement.
The Haymarket affair became a tragedy in a sense, not just because of the policemen who were killed in the affair, but also for the workers themselves, because workers were frightened to be attached to such a radical movement.
The Haymarket riots destroyed the Knights of Labor, but out of its ashes, a new union arose. Samuel Gompers, head of the Cigar Makers International Union, had found what he believed was a better way to form a labor union. Building its membership on skilled workers, the AFL excluded political radicals, African Americans, and women. Asked what labor wanted, Gompers replied with a single word: more. More money, that is. The first major test of the AFL's new brand of white and male trade unionism soon came against none other than the powerful Andrew Carnegie. In 1889, workers affiliated with the Amalgamated Association of Iron, Steel, and Tin Workers Union struck against Carnegie's Homestead Steel Mill and won wages a third higher than those at neighboring mills. Outraged at this assault on absolute control of the Homestead mills, Carnegie vowed to destroy the union. Sailing for a vacation in Scotland, he left associate Henry Clay Frick the job of busting the union. In June 1892, Frick announced that the company would negotiate only with individual workers and not the union. The war was on.
Workers were locked out of the Steel Corporation. They were not allowed to get in so that they could strike within the company. And when the workers tried to storm the company plant, the Pinkertons would repel them. So they would use direct force with a private police force.
Strikers and their families fought off armed Pinkerton agents in a severe battle on the shores of the Monongahela River. When sympathy strikes spread to surrounding mills, Frick convinced the governor to send the state militia to keep the mills open. The workers held out for 4 long months, but outgunned and overpowered, they finally gave up. The failure of skilled steel workers to protect their jobs dealt a severe blow to the AFL. Out west, company-hired goons and state militias crushed mine workers in a series of even more violent confrontations. Trouble was also brewing in the American countryside, where people were mounting their own campaign against America's new industrial order.
After a long life of toil, economy, and self-denial, I find myself and my family paupers. With hundreds of hogs, scores of good horses, and a farm that rewarded the toil of our hands with 16,000 bushels of golden corn, we are poorer by many dollars than we were years ago.
Between 1865 and 1890, Americans put more acres under the plow than they had in the previous 250 years. The nation's West was rapidly becoming the breadbasket of the world. But in the 1880s, prices dropped, the weather turned mean, and American agriculture went into a deep depression. As agricultural surpluses mounted, the price of grain and beef plummeted. Farmers already heavily in debt to bankers were forced to grow more and more to make less and less money. Unable to make payments on their loans, families lost their farms, packed up their belongings, and left their homes. Between 1882 and 1892, western Kansas lost half of its population. In South Dakota, Iowa, and Nebraska, families packed up their wagons and headed back east. Farmers blamed their troubles on the unholy alliance of big business and government, on manufacturers who were protected by federal tariffs that raised the price of foreign goods, railroads that charged exorbitant interest rates, and bankers who held their mounting debts.
There are 3 great crops raised in Nebraska. One is a crop of corn, one is a crop of freight rates, and one a crop of interest. One is produced by farmers who, by their sweat and toil, farm the land. The other two are produced by men who sit in their offices behind their bank counters and farm the farmers.
It is no longer a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, but a government of Wall Street, by Wall Street, and for Wall Street. Mary Elizabeth Lease.
The federal courts consistently interpreted the Constitution to favor business.
The most common form of stopping strikes by government was the use of the injunctions, and we see hundreds and hundreds of injunctions issued by local judges at this point. It's the judiciary, it's judges who play the greatest role in stopping strikes.